Dualism is a philosophical concept that suggests that reality is composed of two distinct entities, the mind and the body. This idea is one of the oldest in philosophy, dating back to ancient Greece, and has been proposed by many philosophers throughout history. In this video, we will explore the concept of dualism and the arguments for and against it. One of the key arguments in favor of dualism is that it explains the relationship between the mind and the body. Dualists argue that the mind and the body are distinct entities that interact with each other but are not reducible to one another. This means that the mind cannot be explained in terms of the brain and the body cannot be explained in terms of the mind. Another argument in favor of dualism is that it explains the existence of consciousness. Dualists argue that consciousness cannot be reduced to physical processes in the brain, and that it is a separate entity from the body. This means that consciousness is not something that can be explained in terms of neurons and synapses, but is a separate aspect of reality. Moreover, dualists argue that the mind and the body have different properties and characteristics, and therefore, cannot be identical. For example, the mind is said to be non-physical, non-spatial and immaterial, while the body is physical, spatial and material. However, there are also arguments against dualism. One of the main arguments is that it is difficult to explain how the mind and the body interact with each other. Dualists argue that the mind and the body interact through a mysterious and inexplicable process called interactionism, but critics argue that this is an unsatisfactory explanation. Additionally, physicalists argue that the mind and the body are not separate entities but are rather different ways of looking at the same thing. They believed that mental states and processes were reducible to physical processes in the brain, and that consciousness was not a separate aspect of reality but rather an emergent property of the brain. Moreover, some critiques argue that the dualism concept is difficult to test and verify, making it unfalsifiable. Another argument against dualism is that it implies that the mind and body have independent existences, which is problematic. If the mind and body have independent existences, then it would imply that death is not the end of consciousness, which would mean that consciousness could continue to exist after death. In conclusion, dualism is a philosophical concept that suggests that reality is composed of two distinct entities, the mind and the body. While dualism has its supporters, it also has its critiques. The main arguments in favor of dualism are that it explains the relationship between the mind and the body, consciousness and the different properties of the mind and body, while the main arguments against it are the lack of explanation of the interaction between the two, the idea that it is unfalsifiable and the idea that it implies that consciousness could continue to exist after death. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.